as far as my like spirit tie, like that sounds very, I don't know, maybe too. But
Hey,
I
I'm
feel,
over here in California. Spirit ties, it works.
well, I'm in Texas, so everyone's like, simmer down now.
Welcome into the harvest. Friends, this podcast is dedicated to helping you be a disciple and make disciples in the everyday of modern life. And we're going to be talking about issues, principles, and practices to help you do that. My name is Andrew Stroud. I am the project lead for Into the Harvest, and I'm joined today, as always, by my good friend, Abigail Wilson. She is our editor-in-chief over at our blog, intotheharvest.org. Abby, good to see you.
Good to see you, Andrew. I'm excited about today.
Yeah, me too. We've got a great show. This show is going to be coming out. We do these shows every 2 weeks. And so I do think we'll have one more show before Halloween. But our listener question is about Halloween. We want to go ahead and get it in this week so that people actually have time to listen to the show and
ponder
and at least get our take on Halloween. So why don't we dive right into that with our listener question of this week? It comes from Hannah Phillips, who some of you know is my daughter. But she asked this question, not because she doesn't know how I feel about it, but because I think she thinks it's a good question for other people to be thinking about as well. It is, what are your thoughts on celebrating Halloween with your kids and trick-or-treating? Is Halloween an evil holiday? All right, Abigail, you have kids. Halloween is coming up.
It is.
What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, here's the soundbite. I do think that Halloween is evil. Pause. Okay, but not what you might think. I just said that for the dramatic effect. I think it's more that anything that is going to, I don't know, point away from Jesus, away from his kingdom, away from the work that we want to do there, might have some evil, and there's always principalities and powers that are trying to pull us away. So I think you could get very dramatic and say like, wow, we just have to shun this thing forever. I probably fall somewhere in the middle. I did not grow up celebrating Halloween, and neither did my husband. And so we have no like nostalgia attached to it. And so it was super easy for us to just be like, we don't really care about it. And so we never made an effort. I don't like decorate for Halloween. I decorate for fall. And I will tell you that if it is at all something we can leverage for the kingdom, then we will do that. So last year, an example of that would be, it was Halloween. My kids, well, it may have been the year before, it wasn't COVID. We're all just like chilling. It was like a Tuesday or something. And we're all doing our normal evening routine of homework. And a neighbor who we had just met texted me and was like, where are your children? I have full-size candy bars over here and like no one's trick-or-treating. And I was like, be right there. And so I was like, kids, get in the back, throw on some costumes. We're doing this. And so my kids were happy because they got full-size candy bars, and we got to make another like connection with our neighbors, which was really the thing that I cared about. So Halloween, can take it or leave it. I don't think that you're going to go to hell for celebrating Halloween. I do think it is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. And I just feel like we should do what is going to bless the most people. What is your take on it? What does your daughter already know that I don't know?
Well, you said it very concisely. I don't know if I'll try to do the same. So I would say, is Halloween evil? No. So there we go. Get another soundbite.
Great.
But it's sort of the same thing that you said from the other side of the coin, which is the celebration itself. I think it's a question of what you're celebrating, how you're celebrating it. So, now, some people would say, well, obviously Halloween, there is definitely for many people, it is almost a celebration of the occult.
Mm.
And so we've never celebrated it that way. And so I think it is how you go about celebrating it with your kids. For us, I mean, we did grow up, both my wife and I, in families that celebrated Halloween. It was definitely one of the big holidays of the year, and we had fun with it.
Yeah, so you have nostalgia attached
I
to
have
it, which I think
nostalgia.
is important. Like if you
Yeah,
have that, then
yeah.
yeah.
And I don't really, maybe I'm just blind to it, but I don't really see how it pushed me towards evil or moved me away from God. So I guess that's the other side, is that I feel like I came out of that, and it was for us, it was, kids love dressing up in costumes and kids love candy. So
Yeah.
to
Seems like a
us,
win.
and carving pumpkins, like there are so many, I think, enjoyable, fun parts of Halloween. For us, I think it was always about having an enjoyable time with the kids. And so we did have, there were certain costumes that we didn't, the kids didn't wear anything with too much, like things like gore, things that were associated with the occult, whether that was witches or werewolves or whatever. I mean, but things that I guess were on the darker side of Halloween. We didn't watch movies that celebrated that. We didn't do costumes that celebrated that. So, we would watch the Peanuts, the Great Pumpkin.
Yes.
That is a. So we watched that pretty much every Halloween, and we also usually watch The Karate Kid, because there is a little Halloween scene in there. You have to really reach for it, but it's a fun movie.
I support you. I support that.
Becomes a
Like I
tradition.
said, whatever.
Yeah, but I do appreciate that for some people, it absolutely seems like a celebration of evil, and perhaps for them, based on their experience, it has been, without question. So I think it's a Romans 14, where you must live by your convictions, and if you violate your convictions, it's actually sinful. So if for you, you are convinced that Halloween and the celebration of Halloween is wrong, that you shouldn't do it, that it's actually damaging your children, then 100% you should not celebrate it. I think the Romans 14, the challenge of that passage is, if you are someone who has stricter guidelines, then your tendency is to judge those who do indulge in something that you feel is illicit. And the flip side of that is, if you're someone who has broader guidelines, the tendency is to look down or be condescending to those who don't understand the freedom that we have in Christ. So I would just say, know your convictions, and then be aware of the tendency to treat other believers with differing convictions in the wrong way.
Absolutely. And I will tell Hannah that I do celebrate November 1st at Target pretty religiously. And that involves 50% off candy and costumes that are on sale. And my kids do love costumes. So,
right. Yeah. So your kids, it sounds like your kids are getting some of the fun stuff.
Yes. Don't worry, everyone. They're going to be fine.
Yeah. So I think it sounds like, even between the two of us, we have slightly different approaches. I mean, my kids are all grown and out of the house now, but when they were younger, well, two of them are in the house, but they're not celebrating Halloween in the way that they did when they were younger. But your kids are obviously right at that age.
Yeah.
And it sounds like our parenting approach to Halloween is probably a little bit different, but yeah, those are our thoughts on Halloween.
Hopefully they'll all turn out. I mean, mine haven't turned out yet, so we'll wait and see. But Andrew's did, and he celebrated Halloween, so all is well.
What's fun too, like this, Hannah, she does have a young child, and I think Hannah is more conservative than us. I would not be shocked if they don't celebrate Halloween. So even within your family,
like, those tiny little costumes are so cute.
I know. Oh, well, they'll definitely be costumes. She's already got. Okay. Yeah, her 3-month-old has a costume.
Great. So that's all that matters. All right, I think we covered that well. If anyone else has questions for us, now we can do it.
Exactly. So this question was left as a YouTube comment under our video from our last show, and specifically under the segment on faith and culture, which had to do with whether modern believers should be healing people and casting out demons. So there's a card to that video if you want to check it out. If you want to ask us a question for us to address on the show, you can email us at info@intotheharvest.org, or you can leave a comment on any of our YouTube videos. We love hearing from you guys as our listening community. And we actually want to be talking about things that are relevant to questions that you have. So do please ask us a question, leave us a comment, and we will talk about it on the show. Okay, Abigail, for our main topic today, we are talking about best practices for short-term and long-term disciple making. And I thought a great place for us to start here is disciple making, discipleship. These are words that sometimes evoke different ideas in the minds of those who hear them. So when we're talking about disciple making, let's start with clarifying, what do we mean? Best practices for disciple making in what way? What is disciple making for this conversation?
Yeah, for this conversation, I would really describe it as a one-on-one, life-on-life type of relationship where there's going to be a lot of growth on the personal level of following Jesus. So we talk about this a lot on our show, but if you're new to it, then just know that, we look at Jesus with his 12 disciples as examples. We look at Paul with Timothy, Titus. So we really see here very strong, close relationships where the knowledge of how to grow in a relationship with God is imparted. So that's my most concise way, but I'm sure you have a better, even more
No,
concise.
I think what you're emphasizing there is the human relationship approach to disciple making.
Mhm.
And I think it's important for us to clarify that the reason why I thought we should start there is because, in some churches, disciple making is more of a programmatic thing, or it might just be undefined. Like, hey, we're all part of this church, and we're all becoming more and more um, mature as followers of Jesus. Like, we're being made into disciples together as we go through this journey. But we're really trying to focus that in around, you have an intentional relationship with someone else who's younger than you in the faith, and you're looking for the best practices um, when you're discipling them on a short-term basis, or as that relationship takes place over a longer period of time. What
Mhm.
are some best, how do those practices shift? I think that's really what we're going to try to get
Yeah.
at
Right. There's
today.
kind of two maybe different relationship aspects, but it is
Yeah.
important because we see in scripture, I mean, the Great Commission literally says, go and make disciples of all nations. So we know this is something that we as followers of Jesus, should be doing. And it's probably not just a class that your church has on Tuesday
Right.
nights.
Right. So it's not just a class, and it's not just a group endeavor.
Mm,
Each of us as individuals. Now, you can have classes, and hopefully
yeah.
you are part of a church community that values making disciples and is trying to pull together to accomplish that. But today we're specifically thinking about, what are you going to do as an individual to disciple folks on the short-term basis and on a long-term basis. So Abigail, what are some of your experiences in this area?
Well, I think that it has shifted over time, like what I would define as short term and long term. And that makes total sense because I just keep getting older. And so long term discipleship just gets longer. And you're like,
Longer.
wow, we're still doing this. So I think like in my 20s, I would have said long term discipleship was, a full year with someone. Like, wow, that's a long time. And
Mm,
we both know that we've had people in our lives for years and years now and really walked through entire seasons with them. So
mm,
I would say that in our current season, short-term discipleship just looks like someone who comes alongside and really asks for discipleship, maybe for a season, like they may even ask
mm,
for something specific. Like, I see in your family this quality, and we're really trying to make that work in our family. Like, how can we see that happen? That's, to me, maybe how I look at short-term discipleship. But I mean, these are just my own definitions. I just literally made them up, Andrew. So
Yeah.
is there a real definition? Is there a right or wrong to this?
Right. I don't know if there's a definition, but I think the things that you're describing there also are true for my experiences. That so some of the distinctions, I guess we could try to look at between short
Okay.
term and long term.
Yeah.
So one that you referenced there is that short term tends to be more. I don't want to say intentional because long term is also intentional in my view, but
Yeah.
I do think that short term tends to be more specific. So, in the example you used, maybe someone is observing your life and they see certain qualities or with your family, and they want to learn those things specifically.
Mhm.
And so, with short term discipling, it tends to be more specified in terms of what you're trying to pass on.
Mhm.
um, there are certain skills, certain practices, certain really ways of viewing the world, even that you want to instill in this other person. And then over time, as that happens, and they do begin to grow, in a sense, they become more like you, as you're becoming more like Jesus. To reference, Paul's comment in First
Yeah.
Corinthians 11. um, and then it does kind of shift into more of a sharing the journey. You're not necessarily trying to instill those specific practices or ways of viewing the world. You're really trying to encourage each other over the long haul to continue to
Mhm.
seek Jesus. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. And I think as I'm thinking about it more, even with long-term discipleship, it seems more or less intentional because it's, going over but also, you yourself are moving into different seasons. So I mean, people that you've had in your life for a very long time now, I mean, you may be like they sort of graduated from Andrew's school at some point, but you are still growing. You're in a
Right.
new season. You now have grown
Yeah.
children. So it's even they are still learning from you, just things that when they started, they wouldn't have even known to learn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the person who was very influential in my life in the early years of my faith, Cecil Bean, a few years back, we were spending time, and this is probably certainly 20 years into our relationship. Um, but he was describing to me insights that he had gotten out of the book of Hebrews, where it says that because you have loved goodness and hated evil, um, that the Lord has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your companions. That's not a memory verse, but that's sort of like Hebrews 1. And but the Lord had really been speaking to him out of that, and he was just testifying that he believed that the Lord had given him the oil of gladness as he was on the home stretch of his life and his faith. And I think what prompted it was me asking him the question, Cecil, every time we talk, even though you're in your late 70s, you've got some fresh word from God where you've been in the
Yeah.
scriptures and God is teaching you something new. And how is that? Because I don't know anyone else, literally, I don't know anyone else that age who, when I talk to them, is sharing with me a fresh word that they've heard from God that they're enthusiastic about. And
Yeah.
so that was his testimony, was that he believed that because he had been really seeking the Lord over the course of his whole life, that God had rewarded him with the oil of gladness. And so I guess that's just from my own story. That
Yeah.
was like not a new lesson, but something that, I haven't been there yet. I'm not in my 70s,
Right.
but I would love to be hearing from God, and I would love to have that the oil of gladness, so to speak,
Yeah.
at
That's
that
really
age.
cool.
So I think
That's a good story.
that's kind of what we're trying to refer to, is how do you
Mhm.
maintain those relationships and still be encouraging those for the long haul.
Yeah. So one thing that I was thinking about as like in the definition realm is really, to me, it's easy to look at it in a family type relationship of so short-term discipleship is kind of the season I'm with my children right now. So they're
Yes.
they're like literally in the house, and sometimes you have to remind them to brush their teeth. So a short
Sometimes.
term, yeah, right. I know that was ridiculous. We all know I do it every day. Okay, so just it is really life on life. Hopefully, if they'll allow
Right.
that, I think that's always our goal, and what we try to inspire to around these parts. But just much more like very involved. And then as they grow and your relationship grows, you get to a point where it's like the grandparent
Mhm.
relationship, where you go visit and it's really amazing and you get a great catch up. And like the story you just shared with Cecil, you
Right.
get to catch up with Cecil and still learn amazing things from him, but
Mhm.
you are not in that same day-to-day relationship that you were 20
Yes.
years ago.
And that really, so earlier, I knew intentional was not the right word, because I think we should be intentional in our long-term discipling as well.
Yeah.
The word is actually intensity. So that's sort of,
Okay,
I do
great.
think short-term disciple making tends to be more intensive. And that's
Great,
really
yes, I like it.
what you're describing there with the family. I
Mhm.
totally agree with that. There are a lot of parallels, and short-term discipling is more akin to raising children in the home. So it is very intense.
Yeah.
And but of course they're your children throughout their lives, and it's just going to shift as they move into adulthood. And
Mhm.
I think what the intensity does drop, but where we need to remain intentional is maintaining those relationships. And I think that's another, I would say that's another distinction between short-term and long-term disciple making, is that the number of people that you're going to be involved with in short-term disciple making is far greater than the number of people that you will maintain an ongoing long-term discipleship relationship with.
Mm.
And that's
Yes.
okay. Like, that's normal.
Mhm.
So that maybe that's where it's a little bit different between the family dynamic is, I've got my 4 kids, and unless the Lord gives us a huge curveball, like, that's it. Those are my 4 kids that I'm going to have a relationship with. Now there'll be some grandkids, but that's different.
Yeah.
But in disciple making, I think you're going to have many people that you're investing in that intensive short-term way, but only a few of those relationships. So to try to put a number on it, I would say in my own life, there's probably not probably there's less than 10 people that I would say that I'm in a long-term discipleship relationship with, um, for the long haul.
Yeah.
Even though there've been probably hundreds of people that I've had the chance to share with in the short-term way.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of comes naturally. A lot of this, it's almost hard to talk about because it just sort of happens. It's not a super intentional conversation where,
Mhm.
as the short-term discipleship ends, that you all sit down and say. So I think we're probably not going to stay in close touch. Is that what we're saying? And like
Right.
that doesn't happen. Maybe it kind of just evolves. But for you, Andrew, like I am just curious, do you think that the intentionality shifts, or is it always the same? Like, are both people equally intentional
Hmm.
in staying in touch? Like, what does that even look like, or does that kind of go back and forth?
For me, it's definitely been uh, both and.
Yeah.
There are folks that um, I'm convinced that the Lord wants me to stay engaged with for the long
Mhm.
haul. And so in most cases, we don't live in the same part of the country anymore. And so a lot of that involves either visiting one another on occasion or staying connected through technology, but also praying for on a regular basis, and just being alert to those people, those relationships, what's going on in their lives, what are the
Mhm.
challenges that they're experiencing. Because for most people, we can't do that. We can't keep up with everybody, especially
Yeah.
as they're moving, we're moving to different parts of the country or the world. And so it's really, for me, it's really been trying to discern who are those people and those relationships that the Lord does want me to be involved with for the long haul. And
Mhm.
then just doing my part. Oftentimes those folks are also part of what helps me discern who they are is those people do reach out from their side and want to maintain the relationship. So usually it's mutual.
Yeah.
And that's part of what often helps me understand. I feel like you and I, our families, we're, that's definitely one of the 10 in my life. And obviously we have a very ongoing connection
Yeah.
because of Into the Harvest.
Yeah.
But I still feel like that's like there's a mutual commitment there and a mutual desire
Right.
to, even though we're in different parts of the country, the desire is to stay connected and to encourage each other as we follow Jesus and help others follow him.
Yeah. I really think that it kind of comes down to my prayer life. The people that God puts, like, continues to put on my heart to, like, continue to have on my prayer lists.
Right.
I kind of almost use that as my gauge. Like, there's probably about 4 for
Mhm.
me that just have stayed with us, and I agree. I think it's mutual, but as far as my, like, spirit tie, like, that sounds
Mhm.
very, I don't know, maybe too. But
Hey,
I
I'm
feel,
over here in California. Spirit ties, it works.
well, I'm in Texas, so everyone's like, simmer down now.
You
Like,
were like, that didn't sound right. Spirit tie.
yeah. So I'll find a better word, but I think there's just the Lord just kind of still has a connection there that he has made, and he's not really done with it yet. Is probably
Right.
the best way I can look at it. But you're right. The people, for us, we're in a military community, and it just seems like our
Mhm.
church is always filled with military people. And so it always kind of just naturally, as their jobs change and they just kind of, move on, and we just sort of
Yes.
know, okay, well, this is the time, like, off they go, and we will definitely stay connected, but it
Right.
won't be the same. And man, so you're also in a very military community. I wonder if that, like, what it's like
Right.
for people who aren't, where we needed an
I know.
interpretive person
I know.
here.
I know. And actually, when we moved here to San Diego, one of my desires was to try to put down some roots and stay in an
Mhm.
area longer than 6 years.
Yeah.
Um, because that's really, we're still discovering that, is what do those long-term relationships look like when you are in the same physical area. So that's not something I think I can speak to from experience, because you're right. When you're part of a military community, either you're moving or people are moving, but
Mhm.
almost never are you going to have 10 years with the same person. So maybe
Yeah. Well, I
maybe
mean, we do have partners that we've been partnered with, since
Mhm.
we got here. So, like, 8 years.
Right.
And they very much are, and I say partners now because we very much, consider each other, we're praying for each other's different struggles and encouraging each other. We're on different sides of town, but they're very much an encouragement to our ministry, and hopefully vice versa. Um,
Mm.
and then we have the people who discipled us, who have discipled us since the beginning, the woods.
Mhm.
But that's different. So we don't have any, I mean, yeah, so I don't know. We'll get back to you.
Yeah. Well, we're supposed to be sharing best practices. So we've got a
Yeah.
few minutes here, maybe a couple
Okay.
minutes. So in 2 minutes, maybe if you want, maybe you can take just some of your thoughts on best practices for short-term disciple making, and then I'll give a couple thoughts on
Okay.
long-term.
Okay. I would say with short-term discipleship, really intentionality is key. Hopefully you're doing life together. Um, and so that can start to feel very comfortable and casual. And so just staying on top of praying for that person, and asking the Lord, like, what is the next thing that we should really be working on together? And then really being intentional about weekly time together has been really key. I am in my mid to late 30s time frame, and so the people I'm discipling are now a little bit older, just by nature, I guess. And so I'm dealing with their like mommy schedules and their own crazy life schedules as well as my own. And so I really think that being intentional about meeting times and then being intentional with their time. So if they said they had an hour, just be really kind to that hour. Like don't, waste time. And instead use all the other time to be very relational and fun and do all the good loving stuff that I think we all need to do with our disciples. But I think just actually being very intentional with them about where we're headed and what we can do together with the time we're given.
I love that because I heard two things there.
Okay.
So let me just repeat them. And if they're way off, let me know. So the one was that be purposeful about spending time together, share life together.
Yeah.
The second was be very purposeful about the things you should be working on during that time. And those two don't always fit easily with one another. Sometimes when you're spending lots of time together, it's natural to be unintentional about working on specific things. But that's a great balance, I think, to just keep in mind with short-term disciple making is, be very intensive with spending the time, but also with what you're doing, the things you're working on as you spend that time together. I think for long-term disciple making, some of the best practices, just to throw it back just a little bit, when you asked about, is that more on the older person or the younger person? I do actually think it's more on the older person, generally speaking, which doesn't mean the younger person cannot initiate and reach out. But just speaking for myself as someone who is approaching the age of 50, the folks that I do have those relationships with, they typically are in the busiest season of life. They're in their late 20s, they're in their 30s.
Yeah.
And so I can remember back and realize what that looked like. And so to make the effort to stay connected, to reach out, to drop a text, to make a phone call, to suggest jumping on a video call and just catching up, and then asking what is going on in their lives. I think that's the other thing is best practice for long-term disciple making is to be much more responsive to what's going on in their lives than necessarily, I think we should talk about this. It's more of what's happening in your family, what's happening in your personal life and your walk with the Lord in ministry. What are those challenges? How can I be praying for you? Again, you're going to do that in your short-term disciple making as well. But I think with long-term disciple making, it's much more responding to what God is doing in their lives. And then as we talked about earlier, sharing what the Lord is teaching you. But Cecil, the guy who discipled me, he one lesson that he shared that I think was great is when I'm in my 50s, the things that I'm learning from the Lord, those are the things that I'm most excited about. And so if I'm not careful, then the tendency can be, that's what I want to talk to these younger believers about. But I really need to be talking about the things that they're dealing with. So I can share what I'm learning, but I want to be more focused on what is it that they're up against. And those would be my best practices for long-term disciple making.
That's really good, Andrew. So we've talked in the past about the 80-20 sort of rule where it's like 80% what they want to talk about, 20% what, you feel like they need to hear from you. So would you say there's a different, does it shift? Because I'm kind of hearing you say that, like you're doing more listening with the long term.
Right. Yeah, I think, maybe it's even less than 80-20. Maybe it's like, so 80-20, maybe
it's 90-10.
It shifts more to 80%. What are they up against? And then 20%, what am I learning? Versus 80%, what do they want to talk about? And 20%, this is what I really want them to learn.
Yeah.
So it's a good question.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, that is exciting. And hopefully this has been encouraging to people and not just like, man, you guys don't know our lives at all. Bring in your questions, people.
Exactly. Abigail, for our faith and culture segment, we're going to be talking about the recent expose of Facebook and something that the Wall Street Journal has called the Facebook Files. They've got a whole series of articles and podcasts detailing whistleblower things that have come to light about Facebook's practices. But we're really using this as a proxy,
Yes.
I think, to talk about the role that technology, and I would say especially information technology, the internet, social media, the role that these things have in our lives, and how we should be thinking about them, how we should be, how they may be affecting our lives as disciples in the modern world. So why don't you get us started? I know this is something that you've been paying attention to at least a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think we can learn from the Facebook files?
I think it should hopefully just be a reminder of the truth. Hopefully, it's not a shock for people to find out that Facebook does not have our best interests at heart. If that is shocking to you, then really please take a minute and at least like read an article or do something, because hopefully it's just a good and solid reminder. And sometimes we really need reminders that the entities around us, like our governments and the businesses like Facebook and the media giants surrounding us, do not have the moral or the integrity that we as believers have, and nor should we expect that from them. And so we shouldn't be in an outrage about it, but we should very much be on our guard, because it is not a safe space out in the world.
No, it's not.
Yeah, not a safe place.
Yeah, you know that I'm actually working on an article for our website that should actually, it better
It's
be
out
out
now.
That's right. By the time this podcast comes out, that article better be done and up on the website. But it really actually touches on this, and we didn't coordinate when we were discussing having this be our faith and culture segment.
Mhm.
But one of the ways that I think about this is that we used to think about technology as something that we would use to make our lives better. And more as modern people, it can feel like technology is using us to manipulate. Companies are using technology to manipulate us, or to extract from us what they want. And I think that's one way to think about the revelations that are coming out of the Facebook files. It's really, like you said, it's not really shocking. I think many of us probably had some level of understanding that this is the way it was, but maybe the depth and the detail and the fact that it's so known within the company itself that, hey,
Right.
this is the way that it's working, and that they're just driving forward anyway. I think that's the thing that's like, okay, that's the confirmation that not only is it having this effect, but it's known within the company, and they're still, in some cases, purposely pursuing practices that would truly not benefit your life or benefit your children, but would benefit the bottom line for customer, or for Facebook's customers and those that are advertising.
Yeah. I think it was there was one, I was doing the journals podcast, and it was a whole series, and I think it was like 4, but it was the one on the use to buy and sell humans for various
Right.
purposes. And
Human trafficking.
human trafficking,
Right.
even just as like a household worker, but they're like a slave, a full-on slave. It gave me pause of like, is this a moral thing to even use Facebook? Like, they're doing this.
Right.
So I think we as Christians today do have some new challenges
Right.
in the world that we are in today that may seem different from biblical times. Like, where's my verse about what to do about that?
Right.
So what would you say, Andrew, like, as we negotiate? I mean, we just have to be in the world with these entities. I mean, we're not telling anyone to get off Facebook, but how should we as a believer negotiate this world of these types of businesses?
So that's really what I'm grappling with in this article. And I would say one is to not be naive about technology. to kind of know the score, to know what's happening, um, and then to take steps to make sure that you're not allowing that to be a detriment to your own faith, your own mental health, the well-being of your family, which is it's a really challenging one, with teenagers and smartphones. So I think the first thing is to be very alert and to not be naive to
Yeah.
the
Turn a
modern
blind
day
eye.
challenges. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then a second one I think is to be able to purposely move in a different direction.
Mm.
And so one of the ways that I was thinking about this as I was writing was that technology is right now being actively used on you, to try to steer you. The Phillips translation in Romans 12 says, "Don't let the world squeeze you into its mold."
Mhm.
And one of the ways that the world is really trying to squeeze us into its mold right now is through social media, or really just any kind of media, I would say, actually, not just social.
Yeah.
But and so you have to make sure, as much as possible, we have to make sure that we are the master of the technology that we're using, and that we're not being mastered by it. And that's a real challenge. That's a challenge
Mhm.
that I don't think previous generations have had to be aware of, and then to be actively struggling against. Um, so that's just a starting point.
No, it's really
Um,
good.
yeah.
Well, and I want to just let everyone know, if you're looking for that article, it is actually for our donors. So it's not on our main page, but it will be going out, or is already out to our donors. So if you
Yeah.
want to be a part of that, then you can join our team, which is also, the information is on our website. I just had to throw that in there, Andrew, because you
No,
did
it's
work
good.
very hard on that article. And I would love for more people to get to read it, because it's really very pertinent, in fact, in the news right now. And if you are not, you need to not turn a blind eye, like watch
Mhm.
these or listen to these
Right.
podcasts and read the articles, because it's very disturbing.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Abigail, I think we're out of time for today's show. We hope it's been an encouragement. We hope it's actually helpful for those of you who are part of our community, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really encourages us in our faith. We're trying to live this and not just talk about it. Um, and we're hoping that the community can grow and that you can be encouraged by it as well. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with our next show. Until then, Abigail.
See you later.